Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Marianne Lippa. I am one of the advisors on the graduate student and postdoc team. We are delighted that you're here today to learn more about how to write a cover letter that your reader will remember. It's part of our 2025 PhD job search prep camp. As I mentioned, this will be recorded and you will have access to it on our YouTube channel. But let's get started. We have a lot to cover in our 30 minutes together. So today I'm going to give a brief overview of our agenda. We will talk about what the purpose of a cover letter is as part of your faculty job search application materials. We'll talk about kind of the nuts and bolts in terms of formatting. We will also discuss the importance of having your research mentioned in the cover letter and how to best incorporate that. In addition, we will also include a section in the presentation about teaching and how to discuss that in your cover letter. And then finally, how important it is to tailor and customize your cover letter for each of your applications. So the goal and purpose of a cover letter is to introduce your application to the interviewing and faculty committee that accompanies your CV and other application materials, right? So along with your CV and resume, it serves as that first impression for your potential employer, right? So in this case, it's the college or university. It allows you to provide that narrative and that explanation of your story to the reader and to the committee. Because the cover letter is typically the first piece that they will review as part of your application materials, the goal is to hopefully synthesize your other application documents in the cover letter itself, right? So it enables you to give a snapshot of who you are as a candidate. It gives some things to highlight. It talks about you as a researcher, you as a teacher, and how do those align with the institution as well as the academic department to which you are applying. It also enables you to discuss your interest and experience in the research, teaching, mentoring, as well as university service. So some tips on writing the cover letter, right? So first and foremost, you want to make sure that the tone of the letter is professional, positive, you're confident. You really want to make sure you're writing like a colleague, like a future colleague of theirs, and not just as a graduate student or trainee. So that means using direct language, making sure you're showing and giving examples, you're not just telling. It's important to tailor your cover letter to show and demonstrate how you fit into this faculty role and how you would be a good fit into their department and the university and college. It's important to remember that it's not just a repetition of your CV. There will be some repeating, of course, but it's not going to be repeating everything that you've indicated in your CV. Otherwise, the cover letter would just be too lengthy, right? So you do need to make sure that you're incorporating key elements that you want to expand upon in your cover letter. You want to think about how you can highlight your experience and expertise as relevant to the position, right? So the key is making sure you're demonstrating how your background is relevant to this faculty role. And in addition, one of the primary purposes of the cover letter is to draw that connection between the past, which is demonstrated on your CV, and then the future, right? So thinking about your future research interests, your teaching interests, how does all that experience fit into the overall mission, vision, and goals of the institution as well as the department? One of the ways that you can help determine that is to look at faculty profiles on the departmental website, thinking about the overall university mission of that college, of the institution. So doing your research is really important as you prepare your cover letter. Some additional tips to think about is that you want to avoid language that does not position you as an independent scholar, right? So you want to make sure that you are being seen as a future colleague of theirs and not as a student, which currently you are a student, but you want to make sure that they are able to kind of envision you as one of their future colleagues. So that means being confident, right? Being confident in your tone, in your wording. So here's an example, right? So I'm completing my PhD under the supervision of Professor XYZ. You can kind of see how that's very much passively written. It's showing that you're very much a graduate student, right? You're under the supervision of your advisor, of your PI, right? So you want to think about being much more active and being more direct. And so you can, for example, rephrase it as, I am completing my PhD in, your field at the University of Pennsylvania, and my advisor is Professor XYZ. So you can really get a sense of how it's written more confidently and much more actively. Here's another example, right, of making sure that you sound more of a future colleague and not just as a student. So I'm currently a doctoral candidate of your academic discipline at the University of Pennsylvania, preparing to defend my dissertation in the month and year. Versus how it can be written much more confidently and more strongly, where you say, I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Pennsylvania with an expected graduation date of, and then you would list your month and year. So you can really see how just the changing of some of the phrasing really enables them to have a better image in their mind of you as a potential colleague and not just as a student. So here's a more detailed example that we included here, where it talks about I'm ready to apply for the tenure track assistant professorship in the history of science, technology, and medicine, advertised on the University of San Diego website. I'm currently an advanced PhD candidate working under at the University of Pennsylvania in the history and sociology of science department. Currently writing my final chapter, I plan to defend my dissertation in May. I believe that my research and teaching experience in the history of biology and American life sciences make me a strong candidate for the position. So some of the words that I've highlighted here in yellow really kind of stand out as not as active. They're more passively describing who you are as a candidate. You're saying that you're working under someone, right? So you're under their supervision. It's not as strong or as confident as it can be worded in kind of the rewritten piece below, where you would say, with 3 years of teaching experience at the graduate and undergraduate level, deep research knowledge and expertise in the history of life sciences in America, and a strong record of research publications and international presentations, I'm excited to bring my research and teaching skills to this role. So you can see how, just changing some of the words, like where up above it says, I plan to defend. You can say, I will defend my dissertation, right? So just some of those small word changes make a huge difference in the way that you are presenting yourself as a candidate. You also want to avoid using the words, I believe, or, it makes me a strong candidate. No, you are a strong candidate, right? So again, being more confident, more active in your voice, thinking about how you are a future colleague is really central to writing the cover letter. In addition, some tips for the cover letter also pertain to having different sections in the letter devoted to your explanation of your research, your teaching, and the amount of how much you want to spend on each of these sections is really going to depend on the type of school and institution you're applying for, right? So if you are applying to a research university, you want to make sure that that's going to be certainly talked about in more depth than perhaps maybe the teaching component. And the same is true for if you're applying to a liberal arts college where the teaching focus is more of the percentage of your role, then you do want to make sure that you're explaining that in more depth and detail. So again, this is where customizing and understanding who the audience is with the institution is really important, because that's going to determine how much you spend and the amount of space on those particular sections in the cover letter. It's really important that you not just send a form letter where you're inserting a different name of university and a different name of the professor's position, right? You want to make sure that it is customized, it is tailored, it is very obvious when you're just copying and pasting and changing a few parts of it, right? So again, it's not appealing to the committee, it's not appealing to those reading it. So again, make sure that you're taking your time to write a good cover letter for each application. So thinking about kind of the opening paragraph of your cover letter, right? This is just an excerpt as an example. So some of the things that I've highlighted in yellow, again, kind of go back to where you want to improve upon kind of that student-focused part of introducing yourself, right? You want to make sure that you're being seen as a future colleague. So again, not overemphasizing that you're a graduate student, right? It's clear that you are a graduate student as you're pursuing your PhD. So that's simply sufficient to state that you are, what your dissertation is. You also want to think about what can you put in that opening paragraph that really is then going to be expanded upon later on in the letter, right? So what's highlighted in blue talks about the demonstrated commitment to pedagogy, interdisciplinary scholarly interests, right? that's what you're going to then talk more about. And so it really kind of sets that stage for what they are going to read further into the letter itself. And again, what I've highlighted in yellow is kind of these phrases that don't necessarily make you come across as confident, right? Saying it makes me, I believe, you want to make that much more active, right? So again, I welcome the chance to teach. It's just not as direct as it can be. So thinking about ways that you can really be more active in your voice and more confident is really important. As you start to write your cover letter, you want to make sure that you are doing research on the institution you are applying to and the department. So take a look at what the priorities are of the academic department itself, as well as the institution. This information is on their websites, so make sure that you are doing your due diligence in that research. You will also want to take a look at other faculty members' profiles and what do they study in the department. In terms of their research, would you have a particular niche in that department? And if so, that could be something that you will want to speak about. What unique resources do they have as a faculty member there at both the university level and as at the departmental level? And then fundamentally, making sure that you're paying close attention to what the primary responsibilities of the faculty position are. And that's where looking at the job ad is going to be very important to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what those responsibilities entail. So some of the nuts and bolts of the cover letter. So real quickly, I will just go over that with you. You want to make sure that the font size is either 11 or 12. You want that to be readable. So typically, some of the font styles that are used are Garamond, Georgia, Times New Roman, Calibri. Those are just some examples. You want to make sure that there is enough margin space, right? So I often will see students come in with a draft of their letter and the margins are so narrow that it's very difficult to read that. And so it's important to have at least 0.75 or 1-inch margins all around. There needs to be some white space on the page so that it just makes it more readable to those reviewing your application. Making sure it's clear and concise. In terms of length, we do recommend no more than 2.5 pages. That really is kind of the maximum upper limit of how long a letter should be. Now, that being said, some disciplines have other expectations where they may want something shorter than that. And so that length is somewhat dictated by what the standard is within that discipline itself, but also thinking about what other components and documents are you being asked to submit with your application. There are some schools where they're just asking for a CV and resume. They're not asking for an additional research statement or an additional teaching philosophy statement. And so in that case, you will have to make sure that your cover letter is kind of more on that longer end, maybe the 2.5 pages length. If, let's say, they do ask for those other components of your faculty job search application, then you may have a bit of a shorter cover letter. So again, it's really going to be determined and dictated by what is being asked to be submitted. You also want to make sure that the cover letter is written on your department letterhead. So that's something that you can easily ask for through your department because that is the expectation that you do have your letterhead represented on the cover letter itself. You also want to provide the full mailing address of the department, of the university. You want to make sure that the date is on the left-hand side. You also want to provide your address as a candidate, so that's important to include as well. In terms of formal salutations, so again, it may be clear on the job ad who to address the letter to. It may actually say the department chair, or it might say the chair of the search committee, or it may not, and it might just say submit your materials and here's the email address. So again, if you can't find who the search chair is, or if it doesn't specify who the person is to address the letter to, then you can simply address it to the members of the search committee. You want to avoid saying dear sir or madam. That's just, it's too generic, it's very formal. So again, if you don't have a specific name of the department chair or search chair, then you would just say to the search committee, members of the search committee. You want to make sure that you have a formal sign-off. So that can be certainly sincerely, it can be best regards, those types of phrases. And then you also want to make sure that you're indicating an openness to share additional information with them or to have a further conversation. So as you end your letter in the conclusion, you'll have a sentence or two that would speak of that. So here's an outline or the anatomy of the cover letter. So again, you'll have your introduction, you'll have your body, and you'll have your conclusion. Those are the three main paragraph sections. Now, within each of those, you'll have some specific elements that you will want to make sure you include. So within the introduction, you want to be sure to state the position you're applying for. You can briefly indicate why you're interested in the job and institution. Now, the specific areas of why you're interested, that's going to come later on in the cover letter, but you do want to maybe, as that first example showed, at least set the stage for what will then be expanded upon later on in the cover letter. You also want to indicate where you currently are. So if you're a PhD student, a PhD candidate rather, if you're a postdoc, your institution and department name. So that really takes up the introduction. Then in the body of the letter, this is really kind of the substance of the letter itself. You're going to want to make sure that you have highlighted your dissertation and research details and information. You're going to include your teaching experience. And again, the length of the teaching component is going to depend on the job focus, right? So again, thinking about, is this a largely a teaching focused position? Is it more research focused position? Is it a combination of the two, right? So again, this is where things are going to be very much customized. You're also going to talk about relevant experience that you also have and that you're bringing as a potential faculty member. And then university service. This part is optional, but it's really a good key component to include if you're applying to a teaching focused institution. You also, in the body of the cover letter itself, want to demonstrate your alignment with the institution's needs, right? So this is, again, where you're going to have where you will have conducted some research on the university as well as the department itself and what those needs might be. And then finally, in the conclusion, you'll express your enthusiasm for the position, your interest for the position. You can mention your enclosed documents, and then you invite further discussion. So the body paragraphs, just to build upon that for a moment, this is your opportunity to tell your narrative, right? So this is where you can present a picture of you in this role. You will address the requirements and the skills that are desired as they are outlined in the job ad. So paying very close attention to the job ad is important. You want to make sure that you are brief, but that you give specific concrete examples to demonstrate those skills and experience. It does not mean you need to repeat your CV, right? Again, we're not just rehashing your CV, but what you're doing is you're going to include some of those key elements, and then you're going to expand upon those. You'll also have a section that talks about your interest in conducting research. You can elaborate on your current research, your past research, and then what you will do, so that future research, and with whom you might collaborate. For a teaching focused role, you'll emphasize the interest, the commitment that you have, and your experience in teaching, as well as undergraduate education. So talking about in the body of the cover letter, you'll have your research paragraph or paragraphs, right? You'll include a description of your current research. So think about, who is your audience? Are the people reviewing your application all from the same academic background or discipline within your field, or does it go beyond? Keep in mind that oftentimes a search committee may have other disciplines represented, right? So it's important to kind of get a sense of, who your audience is, especially as you are describing your current research. You don't want to necessarily make an assumption that they are aware of your research or that they are familiar with your particular academic discipline. The overarching question to ask yourself about your research is, why is it important, right? So this is something that you really want to provide an overview for. So why is your research important? How did you do your research, and how are you doing your research? That's something that you will also need to describe. You will mention publications, grants that are connected to your research, and you want to include a paragraph that explains the importance and significance of your research in a broader context, right? So why is it important? What you plan to be working on next, so your future research, and your shorter long-term goals, possible funding, right? This can be something that you also include in the cover letter. Here's another example of the importance of avoiding passive language as it relates to the research component, right? So this is an excerpt that talks about the unique interdisciplinary expertise I have gained through these projects has developed me into a leading scholar in this rapidly growing field, enabling me to publish a seminal review article. You can see down below how by changing the way this is phrased, it just makes it more confident, it makes it more relevant, and it really, I think, engages the reader as they're looking through your cover letter. Through my unique interdisciplinary research experiences, I have developed into a leading scholar in this rapidly growing field and have successfully published a seminal review article. That is really important to think about, like how you're presenting yourself as a future colleague and not just as a student. So in addition, these are some ways that students have introduced their research paragraph in the cover letter. So you can see how it says, my research explores the intersections of. In my dissertation, I focus on my work shows that as part of my dissertation, my job market paper applies, right? You can just see how it's really kind of connecting that intersection of research and beyond, right? It might also incorporate elements of the funding that you have, fellowships, right? So to that end, my dissertation analyzes with support from the XYZ research grant. So again, that's a nice reminder to them that you've secured some research grants. You are certainly able to have the funding, right? You've received generous funding from the U.S. Army Military History Institute, the Penn Program on Democracy, Citizenship, and Constitutionalism, and the University of Pennsylvania to conduct research, right? So again, it's really showing what you've done as a PhD candidate in terms of your research and connecting that intersection of research, funding, and grants. Another way to think about your future research and how to describe it is, just using some phrases that really show kind of what the momentum that you're building upon your research, right? So thinking about moving forward, I plan to extend this to examine, right? My dissertation, which I intend to publish as a book, builds a theory of explaining. So these are just ways to really be active, be confident. After preparing the book manuscript, I will embark on 2 future projects for which I have been collecting materials. My research vision as a faculty at XYZ is to establish a lab that leads future research and develop next generation. You can even describe it as, in my first 5 years as a faculty member, I intend to complete my first book-length manuscript and a series of interactive photo essays while also helping to build an innovative center for visual research on. So there's all different approaches and styles, but hopefully these give you a good indication or an idea of how you can certainly tie that into the future research. Now, thinking about the teaching area and the teaching paragraph in the cover letter. Using your teaching statement and philosophy can be a really good foundation and basis for this section in particular. Essentially, you want to describe your teaching philosophy in 1 to 2 sentences, right? So again, thinking about the teaching philosophy and statement as a separate document goes into much more depth and detail, right? But the cover letter is going to give an overview and a highlight of what that might be. You want to make sure that you're connecting your research to teaching, if relevant and possible. And in addition, you want to provide that broad overview of how you will bring or you've brought this philosophy into the classroom, right? So really kind of demonstrating how you've incorporated those elements. And then you also want to think about including the discussion on what you could teach, right? This is really important because it's going to show them as a future colleague, as a potential faculty member in that department, what you plan to teach, the courses, and it's important to keep in mind that it needs to match what they are looking for, right? So that's, again, important to go back to the job ad and see what is their expectation, what have they listed in that job ad in terms of the teaching expectation and requirement. So here's an example. Just give you a few seconds to take a look at it. And you can see how in this excerpt, there's some real concrete examples of ways that they have incorporated different aspects and elements to their teaching, right? So thinking about the interactive experiences, they also list the names of the courses that they want to teach, and even having a field experience as part of that. So again, there's different approaches, but this just gives you one example of how to incorporate that tangible aspect of the teaching elements and teaching philosophy into the paragraph or paragraphs. Here's another example, being able to state that you can teach all the introductory courses if that's mentioned in the job ad. Also, if it's a cross-appointed role, right? So more than one department, showing what you could do for the one academic piece and then the other piece is also important. So this kind of balances out both. And then also thinking about what you could do potentially as a future class, maybe one that they don't currently offer, right? So double check the course catalog for the department to make sure that they don't already have a course like that. And if they don't, then I think that's really great to include what you could teach potentially. So what value can you bring with your research and add to the department itself in terms of the teaching curriculum? So in the conclusion itself, you want to think about how to tie everything together, right? So you really want to think about reinforcing your interest, your enthusiasm for the position, and that's why it's important to tailor it to the institution itself. This is really important. I cannot emphasize that enough, that you do not want just a template for each school where you're just inserting the name of the position and the name of the university. You really want to make sure that it's customized and tailored. You also want to, in the conclusion, demonstrate your awareness of faculty and research areas. However, you generally want to avoid name dropping specific faculty names in terms of future possible collaborations. And the reason for that is some of the feedback we've heard from alumni from Penn that have gone on to faculty roles and they've participated in various programs and panels that we've given. Sometimes you might inadvertently omit a faculty member that's on the search committee, and then they may think, oh, why was I not included, right? And my research is relevant. So it's a fine line, right? So I think it's important to see where their faculty research is and to mention that, but you don't necessarily need to mention specific names. You also want to talk about why this institution and department are a great fit for you based on your research and or teaching. You thank them for their time and consideration, and then you end it with a professional closing and your full name. You can sign off with kind regards, best regards, sincerely, and then you would have your name on there. Real quickly, I just want to mention that we have some upcoming programs today as well as next week as part of the PhD Job Search Prep Camp. This is the QR code that you can access our calendar of events. You can sign up for the events through this code on Handshake. So we look forward to seeing you at some of our other programs and events that we have both today as well as next week. And lastly, Penn Career Services offers one-on-one appointments. So feel free to schedule an appointment to have us review your job materials. We can talk about job search strategies. We can offer mock practice interviews. We can also discuss offers and negotiating those when you get to that stage. So feel free to schedule an appointment with us on Handshake, which is our platform for appointments.